Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending our session tonight at this late hour. This session is called an exploration of feminine values in the context of livestock farming. I'm Jackie Pierce-Dickens. I am the CEO of Whole Health Agriculture. And I have a co-host tonight somewhere, Lawrence Woodward, because when we originally planned this session, we were capped at 30, and then we got told yesterday there were 90 people on the waiting list, at which point I had a bit of an eek moment and decided that I probably better have a bit of help. And also in a session that is aimed at all things feminine, Lawrence does add a teensy bit of balance, although I will definitely say that he is very in touch with his feminine side. So I can see you're all still coming in. We have got some interesting things to discuss tonight. So the context is that within the farming world, the UN Food and Agricultural Organization estimates that 40 to 50% of people are women. And obviously there are variations with region, countries, enterprises. Attention is often given to the burdens placed on women, but we wanted to look at specific characteristics that women actually bring and contribute to farming, particularly with respect to livestock farming. So tonight we're going to explore the concept of feminine values and traits in the management of livestock, and in the context also of the real life experiences of our panelists and you, the audience, because we will be very much relying on your participation in this. So what we wanted to look at was whether gender conditioning, which I don't think anybody would deny exists, obstructs or hinders the application of these feminine values and traits, whatever they may be. We have yet to decide. And if it does, how these can be recognised and addressed both on the farm and in the broader farming community. And also, if we consider that feminine values are indeed undervalued, how we increase understanding and respect for these. So that's a big topic and lots of things to cover. So without any further preamble, I'd like to introduce our panel tonight. So we have got with us, I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves and their experience in turn, but I'll just very quickly introduce, we have from Devon, Pammy Riggs, who is a very well respected figure in the farming, certainly the organic farming and food industry. She's run Providence Farm for over 20 years with husband Richie. They have won just about every award for not just their poultry, their eggs, etc., but also for their being a business, basically. They've won Organic Business of the Year. I think Pammy's been Organic Business Person of the Year. She's a published author and has written Keeping Chickens for Dummies, among other things. She's recently come up with a new novel called Space for Farming, and she was also the River Cottage poultry expert and course provider there. We have Josette originally from Holland, multilingual. I can't keep up with Josette's language skills. A busy mum. She spent 7 years farming in France. For the past 12 years, she's been with her husband in Wiltshire, and they run Jojo's Dairy, which is a conventional herd with a twist. Their cows, whenever I visited them, are just, their herd is a delight to behold. I've never seen cows play quite like Josette's herd. So she does amazing things by integrating a holistic approach into a conventional herd. And then finally, we are really thrilled to be able to have Tracey Simpson with us. Tracey was born and bred on a dairy farm in New Zealand and has been around dairy farming ever since. She tried to escape from the world of dairy by becoming a veterinary nurse, but ended up coming back. She is not only qualified to practice homeopathy for humans, but also for animals in her native New Zealand, where she runs New Zealand farm services to farmers, where she advises farmers on how to use homeopathy for enormous herds of up to thousands. Tracey is currently milking 900 cows with her husband. I mean, it's on a scale that I think we can only imagine here in the UK. So without further ado, I'd like to pass you over to each of them to introduce themselves properly, starting with Pammy.
Hello, people. It's quite strange to be sitting in your own house and knowing that you're talking out into what might be the world. But here we are, the Oxford Real Farming Conference, instead of face-to-face, is face to a screen. So that's quite unusual for me. But my farming life, well, I didn't come from a farming family, but I have to say I spent all my life on everybody else's farm and with a total dream to have my own. I even had the right colour carpet beside my bed as a child, a green carpet, so that I could have my Britain's farm animals there and look down over my bed and study my farm on the floor. So I started off in Scotland, so I've had dealings with hill sheep in Scotland, beef and pigs in Wiltshire, goats, ponies and posh horses in Holland, and then come back to be with beef and sheep here on my own little farm, and then poultry big time, hens, meat birds, ducks, geese, guinea fowl, turkeys, and latterly I have been thrown into the world, into the deep pit that is the milking parlour, looking up at a lot of cows going past. So when I look at it like that, I think it's nearly all of our domesticated animals I've had something to do with and adored. I love being in amongst animals, and I think I'd rather be part of a herd or a flock than I would a group of human beings, to tell the truth. So this being separated by COVID's not been such a struggle for me in lots of ways. When it came to doing my own farm, I did this with my husband, Richie. I have to say, thinking about this role thing, we did actually do a role swap at one point before we went into our farming. I just remembered that, where I went back into education so that I could be a businesswoman, because nobody else wanted to do that part of this job of having a farm. And he looked after the children and learned to cook. So when I think about that, that was quite a big education in our lives. And then we went into business together, and I'm sure we'll talk further about the sort of things that cropped up in our farming life. So I'll pass you on to someone else and listen to them.
Thank you, Pammy. That was great. So Josette, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. It's a bit strange as well for me to be on a Zoom like this, but we'll give it a good go. So I'm Josette, and I'm born and bred in Holland. I lived there until I was 21. Very much involved into farming. Did lots of farming jobs. My uncle was a farmer. We all lived on the farm together. And it was always something I always wanted to do myself. I moved to France when I was 21 and had a herd of cows there and some horses and milked cows for other people. I met my husband there and we moved to England. He was English already. We moved back to where he used to farm with his parents. We farm quite close to his parents now and have about 300 cows here that we milk. We've got a conventional farm, and 6 years ago I had a letter through the post, and that kind of changed everything for me. this was a letter about the Welly course, about homeopathy in farming. And I took the course, and it changed my perspective on how to farm and the values that I give to farming and what I bring to the table now. We farm together. We've got 2 kids as well, so it's a busy farm. We got 2 members of staff, and yeah, don't know what else to say really.
Thanks, Josette, that's great. And Tracey, finally, but not least.
Yeah, hi everyone from New Zealand. So yeah, just thinking what I've done over the last however many years, but yeah, born and bred on a dairy farm. I think I'm the 3rd generation of farming in our family. As such, I've been milking cows since I was 10, I think, when I was first introduced to that. Left school to go farming, and then went vet nursing in the end, which was fantastic. Really enjoyed my time there. And then from there, got married and came back on the farm, and we started share milking 300 cows back then. We were at that job for 7 years, and it was through that job actually that the herd that we brought actually had, were quite badly affected with facial eczema. Now, being from the veterinary side, there was not a lot the vets could help me with, and by pure chance met up with a little Dutch lady, Tenica Verkade, who actually had homeopathic farm services before I brought that. She gave me my first bottle of chelidonium, and what a difference that made to my herd. So that was the first start of homeopathy for me on the cows. Like I say, we had 300 cows back then. And I think I started using it in the March or April, and I got to the following February before I treated one animal with penicillin, and I was so pleased about that. And from there, we've just kind of got bigger. We shifted and came to a 400 cow farm, and then went 700, and then 1,000, and then up to 1,200, all on different kind of properties. So we share milked over that with staff and whatnot, and that was a real challenge. But so much learning to be had when you've got bigger numbers like that, and homeopathy's been a big part of that. And then a couple of years ago, I was given the opportunity to buy homeopathic farm services here in New Zealand. So I have about 3,000 to 4,000 clients all around New Zealand, all at different kind of stages of farming. Some big herds, some small herds, some sheep and beef farmers, horses, you know, sheep, all of what you can imagine. So that's really fun. I really enjoy that. And I think the past 20 years of share milking and milking cows has given you a good insight, and just trying to teach people on homeopathy, and also, and you know, thinking about what we're here to discuss tonight, you know, whether you're male or female, it just depends on you know, your whole attitude towards it really. I think in some ways, when you think about the values in farming. But anyway, so that's currently me. Just, yeah, we're back to 900 cows now, 5 staff. And then I run my business over in Hamilton, which is kind of middle of the North Island in New Zealand. So thank you.
Thank you, Tracey. So what I'd quite like to do here before we get started is to just get a little bit of an idea of you guys. So I can see obviously this screen of your faces, but I can't see everybody. So I just wondered if you're all familiar with how to use the tools by clicking on the participants thing at the bottom there, the little icon there. If you click on that, you should find a list of everybody coming down the side there. Can you see that there's some little icons at the bottom? There's a raise hand, there's a yes, there's a no. We'd like you to make use of those if you fancy just joining in and having a bit of fun with us. So if you are female, or should I say if you identify as female in the audience, just so we can get an idea of the spread here, can you just click on the green button which says yes? Okay, and if you are male, can you click on the red button which says no? Sorry, I don't mean that it's not meant to be a negative connotation. It was the only way we could get to some kind of a poll here. Ah, okay. So it's actually quite interesting that it's any gender neutrals. Do you want to raise your hand if you want to be considered gender neutral or fluid? Would rather not say. Okay, so what we want to start with then is asking you guys if you could just use the chat at the bottom. And again, this is just not to overthink things, it's just to sort of start to get the ball rolling. What we'd like you to do without too much thought and without too much analysis is just put in 1, maximum 2 values or traits in the chat that you would consider to be female, that you would associate with being female. So Sara, who is my lovely assistant, is having a quick flick through, I hope, and just having some kind of... What's really interesting is when we first thought of the concept of this session, was these were the words that we were actually first looking at, first thinking of. It's really interesting to see them reflected here, and some really nice, interesting other ones.
Do you want to give me some feedback, Jackie?
Yes, that'd be great.
So just as a quick overview, they're all very maternal qualities you one might expect. Empathy comes up several times, so does nurturing come up, but there are some really interesting ones such as nature, flexibility, patience, receptivity, care. Also earth was mentioned, of course, Mother Earth. Empowered, nurturing, compassion. Yeah, some really beautiful words actually come up in there.
Okay, Abby's just asked, can we clarify female or feminine traits? I consider these as feminine traits, but not only for females. Absolutely, Abby, that's why we wanted to discuss this. I think that is very much what we're looking at exploring today, is that, you know, a feminine trait or value doesn't have to be gender associated. So what I'd really like to do now, just very quickly, is everybody could think of a masculine trait, just again, without overthinking it too much. If you could just pop 1 or 2 into the chat, that would be brilliant. And again, I'm going to rely on Sara to do a sort of basic tally.
Unmuting myself is quite helpful. Right, so the inevitable assertive, strong, decisive, certainty, but actually protective is a really interesting word, a very paternal word. Decisiveness, strength comes up a lot. Linear, there's a word for us to think about. Unemotional, forceful, some quite negative words such as arrogance, unfocused, and then there's leaders of hierarchy and action. So it's quite dynamic, moving words coming through in there.
Yes, I mean, a few surprises, but it will be really interesting to sort of look at these in terms of, you know, can these be applied to both gender? I mean, obviously, you know, there's going to be some overlap, but it was unifocused, not unfocused. Yeah, but but I agree. There's some sort of negative words in there with the dominance. I saw ego as well. Interesting. I think we're going to have a very good session. Thank you all for that. Leading on to starting our session properly with our panelists now and really getting going. it could be said, and I think what's really interesting is that some of the things that have come up there would sort of bear this out, that women have a more intuitive feel for livestock. They are more in tune, in fact. On the surface, some aspects of the cycle of life, such as reproduction, birth, nurturing, require qualities which are uniquely considered to be uniquely feminine. Is that too superficial a characterization? Are these qualities innate traits or acquired behavior or values? Is there an overlap? Does it even matter? We think we need more understanding in order to achieve better gender equity, but also sort of see balance in the yin and the yang from both sides. So my first question then to our panel is, there certainly seem to be certain qualities which seem especially important with livestock, such as intuition, empathy, gentleness, which have come up with our audience as well. We'd like the panel now to tell us which of these they have brought to their personal experience of livestock farming. And I'm just going to let you answer so that you have a conversation with yourself. So don't worry too much about feeling you must be sort of rigid about your replies. It would be really nice to see the sort of flow between the three of you so that we can emulate this in the breakout rooms with our audience in a bit later. I'm going to keep myself muted for the moment, but jump in if you need me. Perhaps, Pammy, you'd like to get the ball rolling and then the others can join in.
Yeah, I just had to find my unmute button, which I'd actually temporarily lost. So I'm unmuted now. Yeah, I think that I like that list of words that came up, and I think that following the rules is possibly something a bit masculine. If you're given a rule book, to follow them, and in the context of my own farming, when Richie and I really got going, and we had to make money. You can't do a farm without looking at the bottom line somewhere. And we had a rule book, which was 20 years ago, it was the organic handbook that we were given, otherwise we couldn't be organic farmers. And it told us things about, we made a decision we were going to do chickens, organic chickens, and it told us things like, you may keep your chickens in for 1/3 of their life, and then they can go outside. So, and the reasons for this is that they will be protected, that they can stay in a stable environment, etc. And that all seemed very good. So we started physically building the place that we could do this in, this business of keeping them nice and safe from wild animals and the cold and all those sorts of things. So having started building this and looking at the rules with Richie, I mean, we were studying this together. I then had on my farm a mother hen with chicks. And I thought, okay, well, what I'll do, since we're going to have chicks, I'll just follow her around and I'll have a look and see what she does. And then we'll see if that'll help us understand a bit more about these day-old chicks we're going to buy and we're going to grow on and keep safe and all the rest of it. So for 4 days, I followed this hen around with my notebook and took notes. So this is observation. This came up as one of the things. I observed this mother hen, and she was fiercely protected of her chicks, but she took them everywhere into danger and then protected them. But what was really interesting was I've been reading in my rule book that they had to stay at this particular temperature and not go outside. And there was this mother hen just allowing these chicks to go just jolly well anywhere until she shouted, and then they came back, or they shouted and she gathered them in because they were cold. So this idea of having to keep a constant temperature all the time, which is what the rule book was telling me, was rubbish. They can control their own temperature. And then I started thinking, well, isn't that good for their brain to have to think about, I'm cold now, I'm warm now, rather than have this kind of wishy-washy existence where they're not using everything they've got. So that was one thing. And the other thing, which was very obvious, was this hen was teaching them what to eat. we think about the hen as having a gizzard where it grinds up the corn, but actually she was picking up bits of corn, and she was, well, when I say corn, I mean wheat, cracking it with her beak and chucking it in front of the chicks. So they were getting this food, they were getting the understanding about the range of food that they were going to eat. And there we were going to put them in this half sterile condition and give them chick crumb that was going to give them sort of like mushy food. And it's a bit like having your children, keeping them in one place and just feeding them rusks until they're teenagers, then open the door and say, off you go, dear, and eat lots of vegetables. Well, it's not going to work, is it? So having started building this place, I got together with my husband and I went, oh, we can't do it like that. They won't be healthy. So we set about making a different system. Now, nobody told us how to do that. And there was an internal knowing in me that this will keep them healthy. And when I went to a football match where my children were, and I'm in Devon where there's lots of male farmers around, they said, what are you doing on your small holding? Oh, that's nice. And I told them, they just looked at me in horror and said, oh, they'll all die. They'll all die. Fortunately, I didn't really listen to them, because 20 years later, they didn't all die. They all thrived. And I can honestly say we never used an antibiotic in our commercial meat bird herd all that time. We used the fact that the mother hen already had an immune system in place, and the chick has got that immune system in place for the first month. And so to my mind, they have to deal with everything in that first month, not be stuck in a half sterile place and then be chucked into the open air, but actually start off tiny, meeting everything then, and then you can push and pull them a little bit when they're bigger. So for us, if we needed to, at the end when we were coming towards selling them, if we needed them to hurry up and grow a bit more, then we'd give them a bit more of the food that makes them grow. And if we had to slow them down, we'd pull back and give them a lot more natural grains, but always with lots of stones and grit and grass and an outside life right from day one. That was unusual. If I'd gone to a poultry expert and said, this is going to work, before we knew it was going to work, because it was bound to have been a he, at least then, would have said, what's your evidence? And I'd say, I have none. I don't know. So what I say is that pioneers create the evidence and have to be brave. And I think that is, for me, this sort of like inner knowing that we have to do it this way. Even if it fails, it fails on my terms. Okay, I put my hands up. I was wrong. I'll have to go and do something else. So that's my little story about I think, a female trait, throwing yourself in there in a rather mad way, but with the knowledge that it's going to work.
Yeah, and I just kind of feel, for me personally, when we first started share milking with the 300 cows, I just naturally assumed that role on the animal side. I mean, that was my thing. That was where I felt most confident with, way back then, all those years ago. So all of those attributes that, people have written down the side, definitely, it is a female thing. But then, 20 years later for ourselves, because we have grown in numbers, so that has required us to get more staff along the way. And not all of the staff we've had in the past have been females. So that's been interesting for me, just personally teaching, the males within the team about some of these more female traits. But often I've found, there's always a few that seem to lean towards it more so than what others would. So I'm not completely convinced that they are, all female traits as such. I think females have that more intuition towards it. But look, you can teach anyone really. And I think the key with animals over the years is that observation. They always will tell you if something is wrong if you're looking for it. And that type of skill can actually be, often in farmers, it's there within them. But then people new coming into farming, you can certainly teach them to observe the animal and learn all from the animal really, and understand, the difference between a healthy one to a sick one and what they will display really. So that's what I've kind of found over the years of farming. you know, for myself personally. What about you, Josette?
Well, yeah, I've always been involved in the farm here. Started milking when we first started to take on the farm here. But we've always had staff as well, a bit like you, Tracey. The staff has always been very strong male staff here. I've always struggled with it a bit because I've always felt like we never had enough care for the animals, not enough time for the animals. Obviously, work needs to be done. And I feel like the females sometimes give more care to the animals. We now have an extra female member of staff, and I feel much happier now. The cows seem much happier. There is a lot more care for the animals. But then the males, like, we get staff, and the males are doing very well with that as well. But they often lack the attention to details, I find. But then as females, as myself, I prefer being in the parlor. I prefer being with my animals. I do not really enjoy going on the tractor. I do it if it needs doing. I muck in anywhere we need to, but I prefer to be with the animals, and I really love doing it and finding out what's wrong with them. If there's an animal ill, it's like, Josette, come and have a look and find out what's wrong with it, and we work it out, and it's amazing what it gives you. But I don't think my husband will have the patience to find out what's really wrong with the animal. But then I wouldn't have the patience to repair that tractor either, will I? Yeah, so I feel like it is very female and male, but it works together, because I couldn't do it with my husband here because he's got very special traits that I haven't got.
Yeah, it becomes that team effort, doesn't it? It is a real team effort. And I think, you know, in today's world, gone are the days that, one kind of gender will do one thing solely. Because, you know, for me, I never learnt the tractor because, quite frankly, I didn't want to add to my job list.
You.
So the feed pad and the tractor scenario was just not what I wanted to do. And that wasn't through the fact of, I mean, you know how to drive a tractor as such, but I just didn't want to add to my job list, really. So it was more or less, and it sits with me, it is about the animals. And often when we interview people, if they're coming to, work for us, I just say to them, what is your favorite thing about the farm? Because everyone is a little bit different. And so from there, you can get quite a good insight. I've had females in the past that actually aren't that keen on the animals and quite like the outside and the farming and the tractor side, which I find is unusual, but that's how it is, in New Zealand. It's a real number 8 wire scenario here with us, but I do agree, a lot of it, that attention to detail, that's crucial, because it's never the big things with farming. It's actually the little things, and especially when it comes to stock, it's just always those little things that can make a huge difference, but if you can train, you have the right person, that they can all see that.
Thank you all. I'm gonna just in the interests of keeping things along, move along there. I think what's really interesting, I was sort of making notes as you were talking, and what is a theme that comes through with the three of you, and it'd be really interesting to explore this later with our audience, is the fact that you all said that you liked it was about listening to your animals, observing your animals, seeing what your animals show you, and just having that patience to really adapt yourselves to the animals, which is, I think, really interesting, because in our sort of rehearsal sessions that sort of theme hadn't come up, so that was a surprise to me because we've been in places. So that's really interesting. There's some really interesting questions coming up in the chat, which I think we'll try and deal with later, but I'm sure we'll have time to go there. I'd now like to hand over to my co-director, Lawrence Woodward, for the next question. Lawrence is the chair of Whole Health Agriculture and may be familiar to some of you. So Lawrence, would you like to pose the next question to our panel, please?
Yeah, with great hesitation. I think I'm the only male person on this thing, as far as I can tell. Maybe there's one or two others, but anyway, with hesitation. Thank you, Abby, for thanking me being here. That's very kind. Yeah, I think that what Josette, Tracey, and Pammy have said is to highlight what the participants generally said about the list of feminine traits. And I think probably there's agreement that these feminine traits are not necessarily totally gender-based. That males can have these traits, especially in relation to animals. And there's some outstanding guys who do have intuition, empathy, care, gentleness, and so on around animals, even though maybe more women have brought that out than in men. But the question, and I think Tracey mentioned teamwork, and Josette also talked about working together. The question is the dynamic within the farm as a business and as an operation, and whether or not that dynamic of teamwork, there's always lots of give and take within a farm. There's a dynamic that sometimes turns out to be tension, and whether or not, the question to the three of you is, in your experience, does the male characteristics or the masculine traits within a business that may be displayed by your partners or by members of your staff or your team sometimes hinder your expression of these feminine traits? So, for example, someone made the point in the chat that females or the feminine trait seem to be more in tune with holistic approaches or with alternatives, more willing to try alternatives. And that seems to be the case in my experience of some women who are more willing to take chances on alternatives like homeopathy. And that leads to some kinds of tensions with their partners who are less willing to take those chances. So how do you deal with those? Do you recognize those kinds of things, those kinds of conflicts? How do you think that can be dealt with, or how have you dealt with? Have you come across it, or how have you dealt with it? So the balance between masculine and feminine traits within the business or within the farming system, especially in regard to treatment of animals. Anybody, before I pick someone?
Well, I'll just go to say something which has cropped into my head. Are you hearing me, folks? Yeah. And this actually isn't anything to do with animals, it's to do with humans, but they were very, very important on our farm because we actually direct sold everything. Now it's become quite a thing to direct sale, but Providence Farm had to sell every last packet of mince and chicken leg in order to survive at all. So we had a farm shop, and it was very busy because we had a farm shop, our own butchery, we killed our own birds at home, and we looked after all the animals. And I always had a thing that between Richie and me, our partnership's very good, but I would say I knew who everyone was and he knew where everything was. So when a customer came, he'd dig me in the ribs and say, "Who are they?" And I'd be able to tell him who they were. But I'd be going, "I haven't got a drinker for such and such a house." And he'd go, "Oh, well, we've got 5. The 6th one's over there." And I would never know. I didn't know if we had 6 drinkers or what, or 5 or 7. He knew everything about that stuff. But I could recognize somebody who came in their car before they even got out of the car. I can go, "That's Mrs. So-and-so. She's done this. She has that. She likes this. Blah, blah, blah." So as my customers would come, I said, what what do they call, farmers markets, I could see a customer coming from far away and I could already place in front of them what they were going to buy. So that is a sort of like another, I mean, it's a human thing, but humans are animals. So I had that skill much more than him, but I could tell you, I would be running around in the dark looking for that last drinker and crying, and he'd know exactly where it was. So there's a good partnership for you.
Yeah, and I just feel too, Pam, it makes me laugh because, yeah, it does. There's so many skills that you both have, that you both bring to the team. And even with our staff, I think that, you know, some are better at jobs than others because it just resonates with them, you know. But then, you know, some days I can quite easily basically say, you know, it's my way or the highway, and that's just how it goes on our farm at times. Then other times it's, you know, my husband saying that back to me. So the kind of values and traits can be both sides, you know, and it just depends on the situation, really, because there's no real rules as such anymore, especially here in New Zealand. You know, quite frankly, we have a dairy women's network here that's got 11,000 members, you know, alone, and they are all dairy farming, well, not so much all dairy, but sheep and beef, you know, and they all play huge roles within the farm, whether it's the financial side to the animal side. It's just, again, what resonates with them. You know, even in our QCons, you know, which is the quality control here in New Zealand, over 50% of those employees there are females, you know, so, and that's predominantly in a male, has been in a male dominated area, and that's to do with all farming here in New Zealand. So it's amazing the differences. And often when you know you've got a female QCons lady coming to assess your farm, you know, for me personally, I just kind of think she is just going to leave no stone unturned, because that's just how females kind of roll. So it's always a breath of fresh air when you get someone that's probably a little bit more male like, and that, you know, they won't be too harsh on the situation. But it's an interesting dynamics within the farming.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's different roles for everybody on the farm. We all do different things, and we got our own way with it. The thing that always comes up for me is, as long as it's the right thing for the animal, and often that is, you can agree or disagree, but you just do what's right for the animal, don't you? And if that is because you got a gut feeling that that's the right way to do things, then you just go with it. Yeah, there's times we have to move cattle, and it's easier without male members in the team, because it just seems to go smoother. Yeah.
I think there's sorry, Josette, to jump in, but there's maybe a different sort of way of looking at efficiency. Certainly the things I've noticed with efficiency is that efficiency seems to equal speed in a man's world very often. And I've seen awful cases where to get some pigs onto a trailer, it's easier to grab their ears and yank them because you're strong, and it's quicker. But that would not be the way that I would do it. But it's not the way that Richie would do it either, because he'd have to have trained those pigs or allow them to do it. So it depends who you are, but efficiency doesn't mean speed. Sometimes efficiency is absolutely getting the best from your animals, which may take a little bit more time, but it's noticeable, because I said I'm in dairy now as well. It's noticeable in my world that I'm not the fastest in the parlor, but if you look at the amounts of milk that come out of the cows, then when it's myself and the girls I work with, then consistently from 350 cows, there's between 100 to 400 litres more milk. We're slower, but the cows give us the milk. We're not stealing it from them any further than anyone else, but they give it to us. And I think that's because we have a different attitude towards them. Seriously think that we have a different attitude. When I milk with the guys, the quicker they are, they think that's the way. Yeah, that's
You
efficiency.
sometimes have to think differently, don't you? You have to think about the animal. You have to think what is it that it wants? What is it that it needs? Why is it reacting in that way? And then it you know, if the animals are frightened, you just know, just let them have another look, and they'll be all right. Yeah.
Okay, but we've just had a list. I mean, I think that possibly, you know, the partnerships and teamworks you three have developed maybe are very interesting. But we've had a list there that everyone put down of some very, very different masculine traits and feminine traits. Now, within the day-to-day running of a farm, I can't believe that it's always sweetness and light. And that, you know, if the feminine trait of the female livestock manager or calf rearer or whatever wants to spend more time on nurturing a calf or introducing a new, maybe holistic way of dealing with, that it's always automatically accepted by the partner, by the masculine side of the business. I mean, there must be some dynamic, some kind of tension going on there. So does that not happen? I mean, am I living in a completely different world from you? Does that tension not happen?
I don't think that always happens. I think we try and do things in a certain way, and until there is a financial report to that to see that is why the costs are down, then there is a way for saying, oh, you've done a good job. But until then, you often have to wait until you got the financial results. Men are a lot more financial orientated, I think, and they need that. They see that as a business. They want to make the business thrive, and they see that if the money comes in, that's fine. And I think females are a lot more orientated to the animals and kind of try and do their best thing for the animals. And yeah, don't you think so, Tracey or Pammy?
Yeah, absolutely, I do, and I think that was with, you know, with Richie and me, we don't argue, and I don't say we're not wishy-washy, and we don't always agree, but if we believe the thing that we want to do is right, then even if the other one doesn't agree, one of us will just go ahead and do it anyway and prove it to ourselves. And if it starts coming right, the other comes in behind and says, oh, all right then. But I suppose we're non-confrontational people. Neither of us like that. We would rather discuss our way out of something than fight our way out of it. But that is, the financial thing is very important. You know, it's a hard one, because farming well doesn't give you lots of money by any means, and it's a lot of work. But I think from the animal point of view, we know they come first. They always will come first. And also animal jobs, you can't do them tomorrow. Animal jobs have to be done now. There is no tomorrow for an animal job. So if you see something, and this is very true, the homeopathy that I've used in the chicken world, if you see something, even if it means you stagger out there again when you've already been out 5 times and carried lots of bags of feed, etc., and you still have to get up at 6 in the morning or 4 in the morning or whatever it is, you still do that thing because things work, because you're on it, not because you leave it till tomorrow. And this is the same as looking after your children. You don't, you know, children come in with a great cut on their leg. You don't say, oh, I'll see it tomorrow, I'm too tired now. You've got to deal with it. It's what we do.
Tracey, you mentioned the people that you work, your team, and, you know, when you have, as Josette did as well, when you have guys on the team, that you said, yeah, that they have some clearly have these feminine traits, this empathy, this gentleness, and so on. Others don't, and you have to draw it out of them. You have to help them. How do you actually go about doing that? Is there a process, or is it just a relationship that you develop with them? How do you bring it out?
Really, with my guys, it's just teaching, it's learning, it's having them come with me, like just thinking about what Pammy and Josette said. Yeah, definitely. Look, when it comes to animals, they are number one. Sometimes the financial side will come into it, but often if the animals need it, we'll do it, regardless of the price, really, to a point. And when you've got staff with you, and we run a lot of animals here, and just on this past calving alone, we had 36 sets of twins, and we had 5 twisted uteruses. So in that time, between really all of us, but I suppose in all honesty, that calving Springer paddock is what I do. And if I've got someone with me that I'm a little bit unsure of being confident with the animals, they are to come with me and spend a lot of time with me in the paddock, choosing cows and just showing them the observation skills. Really, it just takes time, but because of the sheer numbers, they learn fairly quickly, and out of those 36 sets of twins that we ended up having, which was crazy, we only really lost 1 set of twins. The rest of them were actually born alive out of those 5 twisted uteruses that we've had. I don't know if anyone's actually ever dealt with that. They're hideous. We had all 5 live calves, and that's because our observation skills were just, you're just so aware of something's, you end up being a midwife, I suppose, over that period, and you're out there constantly checking your cows, and it's pretty intense. And like Pammy said, there is no tomorrow. I've been inclined to get up in the middle of the night to go check cows if I'm concerned. I get there really early in the morning, and that falls on me because I just know there's nothing worse. And I think years ago, my father said to me once when we lost a cow over towards the end of calving, we're all a bit tired, and I said to Dad, I just don't know why she died. And he goes, oh, I do. And I was like, oh, what's, and he goes, sleepy sickness. And I was quite young, and it was only probably my second calving. I went, oh, sleepy sickness, what's that? I haven't heard that before. Is that? And he goes, you just never got your bum out of bed to check her. It's just that simple. And once I heard that, I understood it, and from then I just thought, I just don't want really anything dying on my watch. It's just that simple. And so when I think about my staff, often I say to them with the interview, do you like animals? Do you actually like animals? Because if you don't choose this farm to work here. It's not going to fit with us because we're all about our stock. So it's just, constantly training and just teaching them, and often if they've been at another property, retraining them to a point, but you can only work with what they're able to give you back as well. And you soon learn because you're dealing with stock all day long. And other times it's just as my dad said to me a while ago, it's a sixth sense. Some people you can teach, but they just might not really have that X factor. Other people, it's just inherited in them, and what they see as opposed to what someone else sees will be quite different. So yeah, it's certainly a challenge. And some years as we were growing, the emphasis went off the animals and actually onto your staff, because that was where the learning needed to be. You had all those years learning about your cows, so you could probably take a slight ease back slightly and put more emphasis on your staff, and often I say to them, all I've got to give you is our experience and knowledge. You're either open to learning that or you're not really. And as I say, a lot of it's always been males, and there's been some fantastic guys come through. And one of my favorite calf rearers who was with me a lot of the time was a male, and he was brilliant. He was absolutely fantastic, so yeah, sometimes more patience than what I did at the end of the day, the odd day.
Okay, just very quick question, very quick response from the three of you. In my experience, a lot of the people who pushed the conversion of farms to organic tended to be the wife, the women in the family. The guys did, but more often than not, it was the women who were really driving or an important part of the driver. Would you say that in terms of alternatives, holistic approaches to livestock management, the women are more likely to take the lead in developing those or taking on board alternatives or holistic approaches than the guys. Would you agree with that or not? Just very, very quickly, Josette.
Yes.
That's quick. Pammy?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Josette, you wanted to add to that?
No, I think I don't know why, but I think we are more looking for different ways sometimes, more in a nurturing kind of the right way.
Okay. Tracey, agree or not agree?
To a point, Lawrence, you
To
know,
a
if
point.
it was me without my business at, you know, with homeopathy farm services here in New Zealand, where I deal with a lot of organic farmers, and a lot of them tend to be male ringing in, you know, the wife is there, but look, I don't agree completely. If it was without the business, I probably would have been like Josette, yes, definitely, more of a female thing, but because of a lot of the organic farmers, it's the males that are ringing in, and it's generally I found it's got to resonate with the couple. You know, it's because it's not just about the approach to the animals, it's actually looking at the farm as a totality. It's the whole holistic picture of it and all of that it brings. And so, yeah, often it's one or two of them, but look, I wouldn't know which one's kind of done it. I haven't actually asked any of my organic farmers. It'll be interesting. I should probably do that at one point.
Okay, we just want to do a quick breakout.
You didn't ask me, I'm waiting for
sorry,
my
I thought,
answer.
Go on then, sorry,
I'm saying, in my case, I must have struck lucky. I got the rock and roll boy. He was already on the cutting edge.
Well, apart from the fact that Richie seems to like to make fun of my background here,
yes,
I think you have definitely struck lucky with.
I did,
Richie. Yeah, no question. Can we just quickly go to a very quick breakout with one, possibly two questions, and I'd say just with 10 minutes. And the question really is that the roles of both men and women in farming, but the role women are expected within farms, within farming families and so on to have very different roles, and men seem to have different roles. It's how are those trade-offs? What actually happens? What's the process of dealing with those different aspects, different roles and different trade-offs? Or are they openly discussed? Should they openly discussed? Or should the women just, get on and do their own thing? So just a question about that, about how these different roles, these different traits and characteristics dealt with within a farm, within a farming family. And as an addition to that, does that say anything? What can we learn from this kind of conversation and those trade-offs that the agroecology movement can learn about in terms of relationships? So just those two very quick questions, 10 minutes. We should be back by 9:10, if that's possible. So can we, who's going to start with reporting back? Sara, do you want to?
I'm just frantically typing, so I'll try and remember that. So really, I think we only managed to cover the first question, and I think lots of really interesting stuff came up, but one of the big things was not being allowed to show emotion, because that seemed to cause problems. Now, it was not just about women not showing emotion to their male colleagues or partners, but also about, Sian mentioned, teaching young men. Even if there was a quieter, softer, gentler member, he would get picked on by the more dominant boys, and that really shuts them down. Nat talked about the feeling of frustration where she's worried about a sick animal. Her neighbour that she farms with, because Nat farms on her own, and her neighbour supports her. She was worried about a sick animal, and the neighbour dumbed her down because she was being over emotional, and the animal died. And then, of course, she's racked with guilt and frustration and anger with herself for allowing that situation to happen. How we overcome this, I don't know. You know, we didn't come up with an answer for that, but we did identify that certainly one issue is the dumbing down of emotions. That is a real big problem. Just have a quick scan through here. Nat mentioned about a low stress stockmanship in the US that was developed by a man, and she said how useful that would be to bring that into a way of bringing feminine traits across to the UK and their methods of farming here. That's low stress stockmanship developed in the US. Yeah, but for the sake of time, I'm happy to hand to another room.
Okay, thanks. Karen, do you want, thank you, Sara. Karen, do you want to?
Yeah, so we had a really interesting group, a big variation within the room. So we had one who works on a all-female team and stressed the importance of communication, which I think she said that it's good between in a female team, but they also, of course, they lose out on the masculine side. So that was described as, yeah, a loss. Then we had one farmer who farms alone, which of course is a loss. I mean, that's a totally different situation again. And then I think the most interesting that came out was Kay talking about the indigenous people, a group of indigenous people who talk about the balance within yourself and the 5 genders. So it's the men who have the female side or the more male side, and so that's 2 groups of men, 2 groups of women, and then there was the 5th gender, which was the 2 spirits. I'm not sure I got it right, but that was really interesting to me. That was news to me that, you know, there are people who talk about 5 genders. And then we talked about, you know, it's all about learning process. It's all about communication. And then there was Emily who talked about, she grew up having compassionate men around. So that was, and she said, you know, these days it's all about communication, and it's old, kind of old-fashioned, you know, that you don't communicate and destigmatize what is female, what is male, or feminine and masculine. Yeah, and then, yeah, it has to be a constant discussion, and that's a good thing. Yeah, so there was one farming with brother and dad, and that was a constant, led to a constant discussion, which she said is a good thing. Yeah, I guess that's all.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Karen. Jackie.
Yeah, so we had interesting. We had Tracey in our group, so it became a bit of a masterclass in how to achieve certain things and get over certain obstacles, which was really good fun and interesting. But one of the things that came up with us was around the sort of bigger decisions around finances, that you know, it's quite often difficult for women to have their voices heard, that women very often, even if they are equal in the business, they then carry the burden within the house, within domestic life. So there's that sort of imbalance there, in that they're the ones making all the decisions and having to run the household as well as work. There was a feeling that sort of, you know, having shared values was really important, and trying to establish those will certainly be important in order to sort of take it into the wider community. And then Tracey felt very strongly that these things can be trained, and came up with some really useful suggestions. So maybe we need to get Tracey back another time to do some kind of masterclass. That's sort of where we ended up.
Okay. Thank you. We did plan a longer breakout session and a longer report back session, but the opening kind of chat was the opening contributions from the three panelists was so good, we just decided to keep going. So the breakout questions were cut short, as is the feedback. It's I think it's very interesting. And I won't really attempt to do a catch-all, do everything summing up. I'll just give my impressions as summing up as to what I've taken from this. What I found interesting is that there's a long list of, we had a long list of feminine traits that everybody believes or seems to believe and buy into as very important traits, very important attributes in terms of livestock management. So things like empathy, like compassion, like gentleness, like a mothering instinct, nurturing instincts, care, receptivity, another word maybe for intuition, patience, attention to detail, thinking about wholes, whole organisms, or whole living things. Seem to be, everyone agrees, it seems to me, that these are characteristics that are critical to good livestock management, and not just livestock management in terms of productivity and in terms of output, but in terms of care for animals and respect for animals and respect for animalness and so on. I think from the chat and from what Pammy, Tracey and Josette said, that these are not exclusively traits. We might call them feminine traits. There might be traits which are associated with feminine, but they're not exclusively found in women and are not totally ruled out amongst males. However, the list of masculine characteristics was very interesting. They weren't entirely the opposite of the feminine traits, but things like assertiveness, decisiveness, lack of emotion, forcefulness, arrogance, sense of power, those kinds of things may not, as I say, be the polar opposites of the other ones, but they're interesting that that's what came out. When we got into the discussion, of course, people were saying, well, actually, we need both. And life is about both. Life is this yin and yang. Hence our question about, okay, that's true. We probably do need both, but what's the dynamic? How do these things which appear to be polar opposites, or if not polar opposites, are very opposite, actually merge together? So what's the process of them merging together? And both the three speakers and what came out and in the breakout sessions were things like finding teamwork. Okay, teamwork was used, but also was a sense of communication, bringing things together. Now, if we all accept that those feminine traits that we identified are critical for better livestock management, we ought really to be finding a way how to bring those things out, and how to bring them out in people who might be labeled male, and bring out those things inside them and downplay some of the aggressiveness, assertiveness, lack of emotion, and so on. How do we do that? Building up team, respectfulness, communication, those are the things that came out. And it might well be that if we were talking about agroecological ways forward, and we've had a conference now for several days that have talked about all kinds of things, technical stuff and so on, and also a bit about relationships, social behavior and so on. But I don't think there's many of them been in detail about social behavior and how, as individuals, as part of the agroecological movement and as part of communities within the agroecological movement, what we actually need to do on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to headlines that you bring out on high days and holidays. We all talk about communication, we all talk about inclusiveness and so on. But how do we actually bring it about when things that bring out those blockages are, came out of one of the groups, the need to show emotion, the need not to be scared of showing emotion, the need to avoid shutting down, and the need of other people in the team or in the group, in the family, to do things that don't shut people down, and avoidance of dumbing down. Dumbing down leads to inhibitions. So it might be a mixture of doing things in terms of formalization, formal courses in induction or whatever on things like low stress management. It might be leading things, developing a formal communication in team strategies and so on. But it might also just be that we have to build in, both with individually and on the farm, but also within the guidance and the things that we aspire to in the agroecological movement, alongside food sovereignty and seed sovereignty and all of these kinds of stuff. We actually need to be looking at making real sense in a nitty-gritty, down-to-earth way of things like respect, not just respect for animals, but respect for each other, even though, you know, we have different traits, and bringing those things together. I suspect that this demands more of people like me, my gender, but it also demands things of the female gender, not to be put up with stuff, not to try fight against the inhibitions, which is really probably fighting against the education and the background and stuff that people have had to deal with, that women have had to deal with. So I think I will be, you know, from whole health agriculture's perspective, these kinds of discussions and these kinds of developments are things that seems to us to be very, very important, not just for livestock, but also for the farm organism and for the movement as a whole. So that's my takeaway from this, and I'd just like to thank you all and hand you back to Jackie, who is somewhere lurking.
I'm here. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
We've just got 4 minutes. I feel that we could sort of probably do a whole conference on this subject alone. I think there is so much to be discussed here, so much to be said. Certainly, one of the things that I have always found, I've worked in very, very male dominant industries and environments, and I've always found that women are naturally collaborative, but when they are put in a room with a lot of men, they tend to just not speak their truth, and then I think that is everybody's missing out then, because those ideas aren't expressed. And I think that women are so needed in the agroecological movement as it moves forward, not just for the sake of our livestock, but really for the sake of our whole planet. That balance, and I feel, as somebody who's now just entered their 60th decade, I'm holding my breath for the younger generation to start to bring, to tilt the seesaw back the other way, and listening to what Tracey brings, I don't know where she's gone, Tracey, yeah, from New Zealand, where I also have relatives, that sort of freshness and youth and dynamism that seems to be there in their governance is just so lovely to hear that expressed in a farmer like Tracey, even though, her farming experience is off the scale in terms of what we have here. So it just really falls to me to just say thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, bringing your energy, and your consideration, and taking this in the spirit in which we intended, which was to make it sort of fun and interesting, but also to really go away with a bit of thought about how we can all do our bit, be that little bit braver, and maybe reverse that trailer, even though sit on that tractor if we don't always feel that we can. If you want to stay in touch with us, go to our website. We're on Facebook, Twitter, the usual places. Our website is wholehealthag.org. Vicky's just said communication, communication, communication. Totally agree, Vicky. I think we have to keep talking, and I think I think women are sort of probably better at have a facility for communication, and I just look forward to the next couple of decades. Really, really hope to see you in some of the other sessions, and then hopefully again next year in person, where we can get back to doing what we all do best as humans, which is communicating, not just verbally but also tactilely as well. Again, that's one of the things that for me has always been the beauty of the Oxford Real Farming Conference, and it's been fantastic that they have actually gone ahead, and that spirit of ORFC, I feel, has been coming through the sessions. So it's brilliant. And I'm going to stop waffling now and just leave it with a big thank you to everybody, to our speakers who have been absolute stars and gone through rehearsal after rehearsal, and Lawrence, my co-director and chair. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Hope to see you again.
Thanks, Jackie.
Big thank you to Joy as well. Thank you, Joy, for your patience and assistance.
You're very welcome. Nice to see everybody.